long as you bear that in mind. So when you're working junipers, don't take too much foliage off in one go. Now I know a lot of people will have heard of this before, and it depends on the kind of foliage that you remove. If you take off the wrong kind of foliage, in other words, if you take off the good growing tips, too much of those, the tree will let you know by either at best shedding branches, at worst dying. The stuff you take off really needs to be the older inner stuff, or if there's lots of foliage like these both have, you can take quite a bit of the new stuff off, but as long as you leave quite a lot of the good stuff as well. So the year, of course, of doing work on junipers, once it starts to get to this time of the year in the UK, and this is why you've got to be careful when you're watching your YouTube videos, when you're watching all of this type of stuff, be careful whereabouts in the world it comes from, because in the States they're working their junipers now. Well, it's the window for working junipers in this country is nearly closed. You do not work them over the winter, because this is slowing down. The foliage is slowing down. And with this being the engine, you don't work it when the engine's not running as well as it could be. Wait till the spring and then start working them again. When you see them new growing tips starting to get nice and lime green and fattening up. And also, one of the questions that people mention is, but my juniper doesn't extend. There's hardly no, it's not growing, there's no extensions on it. Often in this country, they don't. They might throw out one or two little extensions, one there and one there and one there. But the tree's still growing. The tips on the ends are still swelling and they're still growing. And what you don't seem to notice is the little tip on the end, although it might just look like it's just sitting there, this little lime green tip, that's constantly getting longer and longer and longer. But you don't notice that because it's so slow. Take a photograph of it in the spring and then take another photograph of it in the autumn, and you'll see how much the tree is, it's just swollen, it's just got bigger. And the constant work in this is you need to get in and take out some of the clumps of the foliage in here to let light and air in. One of the things people tend to do with junipers too early on is, you know, I'm a big believer in keeping your bottoms clean and your crotches clean. You're wondering where this is going to go, don't you? So your bottoms, the underside of your foliage pads, right? And the crotches, obviously, in between the branches. Now, these kind of trees, that's fine. Keep your bottoms clean and your crotches clean. But if you've got a tree that's in development, don't worry about any of that. Get it nice and healthy. Or it's always key, get your trees healthy, growing well before you do any work to them, because it doesn't matter how good a wirer you are, you're going to stress that tree out something rotten. Obviously the tree's not going, ow, ow, this hurts, this hurts. You'll find out later on, and junipers and pines take a long time to show any signs of, you know, stress, or, you know, the twigs are dying off. I've known junipers take over a year to die. So, you know, just be careful, be the best you can be. But in the stage where it's in development, that crotch growth that you will get in the gaps in here, right, you need to leave that, because your branch is, chances are it's right out here, and you want to compact your foliage. To compact your foliage, obviously, we all know with conifers you can't prune off all the green and just leave a branch with nothing on it. That's it, that branch is dead. It will not back bud without green, good green on the end to pull sap back and forwards. If you leave that growth on the end and the crotch growth The idea is you get that crotch growth nice and healthy, there's quite a bit of it, and then when it's strong enough on its own, you can come along and cut the long section off that's out of kilter of the rest of the tree. Do you understand that?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people just...
What about, what about junior growth?
What about what?
The junior growth you get.
Good point. A lot of people panic when it comes to juvenile growth on trees. There used to be this saying a long time ago that you must take off the juvenile growth, otherwise the whole tree will turn juvenile. That's not true. Because like you, when you were young and a juvenile, what did you turn into? An adult. So it's the same with these. If you leave that juvenile foliage, if it's in the right place, if it's healthy, strength and location is key. If it's healthy and it's where you want it to be, just leave it. And it will in its own time turn into adult foliage, the scale foliage. Obviously we know why. Does everybody know why that this juvenile foliage happens on junipers?
Stress.
It's a lot, exactly, it's a lot of stress. If you take off too much foliage, the tree panics. Oh, I need to grow some foliage quickly, and it does, it grows quick. It's got a larger photosynthetic area, so it can manage better than it can with the scale, but eventually it'll turn into adult, right? So don't panic if you start seeing it producing juvenile foliage. Don't just go, I need to clean that off, I need to clean it off. If it's definitely wrong and it's right in there and you don't need it, by all means take it off. But if it's all you've got and you want to develop that foliage pad, just leave it. Just let it grow and let it be happy. And eventually, because this juniper had masses, and they're both Ichigawas, and believe it or not, there's about 15 different varieties of Ichigawa. It's not just Ichigawa full stop. There's quite a lot of different varieties, and some will produce more juvenile foliage than others, and this one's a bit of a beggar for juvenile foliage. This one behaves itself a bit better, but this one, and I'll turn it round, this one had a very underdeveloped back branch there, and it had masses of juvenile foliage. So what did I do? I left it, and lo and behold, it's filled in and it's turned into adult foliage. But if you have a little bit of a rummage in there, you can see there's a couple of bits of juvenile foliage starting to develop, but they'll get pruned out because I don't need them anymore. It's got a full head of hair, right? It's so. But also, when it comes to trees like this, where obviously I'm talking about they just swell, and obviously these ones do exactly the same thing. The foliage pads just get bigger and the tree gets wider and wider. So how do you tackle that? You tackle that by these foliage pads here. How we build the foliage pad, you lay your base branches out in the bottom, and then you would sit, as I call your fillers, that sit in the top, right? And that forms a flat bottom, a rounded foliage pad with a bit of volume in the top, and then that rolls up to the next one, to the next one, and then up to the apex, which is like a big foliage pad. But the difference between the apex is, instead of it just being round here, it goes right the way round and it's elongated at the top, right? But to pull these foliage pads in when they get a bit wide, them base ones that you laid down first, a lot of them will get cut away. So you will cut away some of the bottom ones, so you would take off, say, some of that lot there. Do you see what I mean? So that lot would go, and that in itself starts to pull the image back in again, right? It's not quite ready for it yet, but it will be soon. So if you could see this lot here, see that bit there starting to get out of alignment of that foliage pad. So to pull it back in, I would remove all of that lot. and you see how it comes back into alignment. So this is how you generally keep them, you let them grow, pull them in. Now this could be over a series of 5 years. It doesn't happen every year. Don't pick at your trees constantly, because you're just going to weaken them, right? Don't be frightened to let them grow a little bit. Obviously don't go over the top, don't let them go too far, otherwise it's quite hard to pull them back in again. It's that kind of happy medium, right? This one is mossed up because it was on display at Doncaster, so it's still looking its shiny best at the minute. Anybody got any other questions about junipers?
Yeah. Do you cut them with scissors or do you pinch them?
Another good question. Pinching? No.
Okay.
Never ever ever pinch junipers. Books and a lot of the internet and all the rest of it says pinch your junipers back and all. The only time you ever do a tiny little bit of pinching is maybe when you get the extensions, you know, them odd ones, and you've let them grow quite a bit. You might be going around doing your garden maintenance and you might just go bing, bing, and that's all. The books often show this hand, and it's got hold of the foliage pad like that, and then it's got another hand, and it comes in and goes, how to kill a juniper in one easy lesson. That should be called, right? Do not, because that's getting rid of them growing tips that is the engine of the tree. When they start getting quite clumpy, these end bits, you need to go in with a pair of scissors, find the really strong section in the middle, where it's often starting to overtake the rest of it, and get in and take that strong section out. Right, that's really all you kind of need to do. And also, this is where you need your little bits that are growing in the crotches come into that own if your tree's at that stage of development, right? Because then you let them get stronger and then you prune the main bit out too long. Do you understand that? So it's always a case of growing, pruning back, growing, pruning back. Pinching out, not pinching out, sorry, use scissors. Use scissors. It's a lot of people use the term pinching for a lot of things, and it's often the wrong word to use. We use a pair of scissors, and can you see there? You've got that central section there, right? So you would come in with a pair of scissors and take that bit out, right? And that redistributes the energy from that really strong bit that was in the middle, because you've got, if you look, you see how that there is just a lignified stem. Can people see that? I know there's a lot of shit in the way. It's a lignified stem with a little bit of broccoli on the top, right? So you need to clear away the stuff behind that. That's the strong section. That's got all the nice growing tips on, but any weak bits, any bits that haven't got growing tips, that are just cluttering it all up, that are behind that on the lignified area, take away a lot of that. And if it's really strong in the end, come in with your scissors and just take that strong bit out, and the tree will redistribute the energy that was in that to the other good growing tips on the end. Right? Does that make sense?
Can I just ask you, you mentioned early on about the growing tips.
The extensions.
Yeah. How, if you leave those, how does that sort of comply with keeping the shape of the tree?
Right, well, an extension, if you're wanting to grow an area, if you want an area to get longer, by all means leave those extensions to get it to grow to the length of the foliage pad that you want.
Sure.
And then nip it back.
But can you, if I was trying to keep the shape of the tree, you know, sometimes get these old long extensions going.
Just prune them out.
That's all right, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that's fine, prune them out.
Right.
Just be careful how far back you prune it, right? I'll try and explain that. Peter Warren actually explained this really quite well. And he said, if you treat it like the gears of your car, And I can see everybody scratching their head. Oh. You've got a long extension romping away, and it's growing fast, 80 miles an hour in 5th gear. Right? So if you go back on the extension, so 5th gear right at the end, 4th gear a little bit further back, 3rd gear a bit further back again,
So
2nd,
you're doing
3rd.
stage, it's a stage
Yeah.
process.
So literally, never take it back into 1st or possibly even 2nd gear.
Okay.
That's just too much, right? That's going to be into the old stuff that's not really growing too well. The tree will stall, or that section will stall, and it'll just go, nah, sorry, I'm going to abandon that bit. Make sure there's good, valuable tips on it. So 3rd, possibly 4th gear. Does that make sense? You didn't think you'd get into this, did you?
It's in the video where it explained it, to be fair.
Oh God, you haven't seen another video of it.
Chappie's got a question.
Can I ask, when you cut out, are you cutting this year's growth or are you cutting slightly into last year's growth? Or is
It depends.
It's up to your, is it a decision you make at the time?
It depends, because it depends what you're trying to do with a tree. Because if you're styling a tree, you're going to be taking the whole flipping lot out in one area, aren't you? Do you see? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, just general pruning.
But if it's just general maintenance, you take out all the old stuff that's not doing anything for the tree on the lignified, hasn't got a good growing tip in it.
You talk about identifying growing tip, like it's yellow or white.
The best thing to do would be pass this round, right? This has got, it's like being at school, isn't it? This has got good growing tips in it, and the way to describe them is they're a light colour. I'll see if I can rummage around and find a one that's not doing quite so well, so you can kind of compare.
Very often just like single strands, don't they? So they look like
Some of
single
them can
strands,
be,
yeah.
but some of them can be a bit.
How would you get better pads on that, Juniper, there?
Right,
Yellow
so
tip or white.
that bit's a bit weak and feeble, it's a bit leggy.
Yeah.
See what I mean? Whereas that bit there, it's got nice growing tips on the end,
Yeah.
nice and fat, and it's a bit more clumpy. There's lots going, right? So if you have a look at that and then pass it along.
You take if everything's got a white tip or a yellow tip at the end.
What, sorry?
You take if everything's got a white tip or a yellow
Well,
tip.
it won't have a white tip.
Like a
It's
light-
just
light
a
green.
lighter colour to
Yeah.
the background. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I usually say it's more of a lime green colour, because it depends on the variety of juniper. You know, the Ichigawas are more of an emerald green, but then Blows is a bit of a bluey colour. Sargentia's got a slight bluey tinge to it as well. So it depends on the kind of juniper, and there is varieties of juniper where some of them are variegated. They've got like, you know, variegated bits that some people go, what the hell's going on here? But it's actually meant to be like that.
Sometimes you how did you refine that?
What, sorry?
How did you refine the process of that tree? How did you separate the pads?
Well, the separating of the pads is done with scissors and with wire. So if there's anybody here that's not a big fan of wiring, and I bet you there's a few, let's face it, it's one of the major evils of bonsai. I have to say, if you don't like wiring, junipers, you can, by all means, you can have the natural kind of look, and you can let them get a little bit shaggy and all the rest of it, and put a little bit of wire on and just move the branches. And if that's what you like, that's fine. Bonsai is about it. Whatever you want it to be. There's no like, you must do it like this. There's a bit too much of that. Do you know what I mean? If you like it, if it works for you, and more importantly, if the tree is healthy, happy and growing well, the horticultural skills have to be there. But the artistic side of it, if you like it, champion, that's great. But this type of style, which is kind of the quintessential, I suppose, Japanese kind of thing, I do kind of like that. I like the detail and the, you know, all of this. It's not for everybody, I get that. But if you want that kind of look, you will have to put a shed load of wire on, right? Even these fine little twigs, and at break time, I was going to say lunchtime. At break time, come up and have a look under the tree. The wire on this has been on for about 4 years. Now some of these junipers are actually they are quite old, so they don't lignify, they don't put on the wood that a lot of other younger ones or some other different species might do. So that's been on 4 years. This, I took quite a bit of wire off this not so long ago, and this has been, the wire has been on this about 3. So, and when it's just going into wiring, the wire, we were just talking about this actually, people getting a bit of a tiff about wiring and they'll say, how long should I leave the wire on for? That is a how long's a piece of string kind of question. As I say, 4 years, that was just rewired this year, and some of it's going to have to come off. The wire was taken off that last year. It was put some small bits were put on for a show, but I'll have to take that off. There's only wire on this bottom branch to get the buds up to the light on that one, but that's going to have to come off shortly. Depends on the species, depends on the age of the tree, depends on what you're trying to do. But if the wire starts to bite in, and bear in mind with conifers, this might sound a bit strange to some people, but with conifers the wire must bite in a little bit before we take it off. A little bit, I say, hasten to add, not left on so that it's just about getting through the bleed branch, right? Just a little bit, because it needs that scoring to help set the branch, right? If you take your wire off too early, you've just wasted half your time wiring it, getting up stressed about it, swearing, cursing and all the rest of it like people do when they come to wiring. So check your trees regularly, have a little look in and go, right, the wire's biting in on that bit, and then just take that bit off. Just if there's one section biting in, don't take the whole lot off, just take that small bit off, and then obviously that's the kind of time of the year, the tree's obviously laying down wood, it's lignifying, you need to have a look and go back in a week's time and have a look, right, there's another bit biting in, I'll take that off. Right? But don't just jump in there and take the whole lot off, otherwise you're just going to chase your tail. Right? There's a lot of myths in bonsai that need to be quashed a little bit. I'll tell you a very good book actually for quashing a lot of myths in bonsai. Michael Hagedorn's Bonsai Heresy. If anybody's got that book, read it, or if they're planning on getting it, get it, it's brilliant.
What's the author's name? What's the author's name again?
Michael Hagedorn, don't actually ask us how to spell it because I've got no idea.
Had a wrote bonsai. He had a wrote bonsai.
Crataegus Bonsai is he's American, but he did do his apprenticeship with Suzuki, and that's not a motorbike, by the way. So, any more questions on junipers?
Yeah, how would you get better pads on that small one there?
What, on this one here?
Yeah, that's a juniper.
Right, so this looks like a maybe it's green carpet or
No, it's juniper precumbens nana.
it's what, sorry?
Juniper precumbens nana.
Oh, it's a procumbens. I thought I've got a procumbens, but obviously nana dwarf, right? So don't be frightened to prune these quite hard.
Right.
Right? The way you treat these needly types of junipers is different to the way you treat your scale junipers, right? In the foliage here, right, you don't take too much of the new foliage off. These backbud a lot better, right? You let these get quite dry before you water them. Not these. Don't let them get too dry before you water them. Don't just treat every single juniper species exactly the same. they can, you know, they often can be quite different. So to get your foliage pads, if you want dense foliage pads, bonsai quintessentially is all about pruning, right? So with this, I wouldn't do it at this time of the year though, right? You've missed the boat. I would say kind of end of the summer, so it gives it a little bit more of a chance. Maybe it's not quite the end of the summer, but you never know what you're going to get in this country, do you? So, and you can prune. If it's healthy, you can prune past buds, right? So you've got here, you've got some extensions on there, and there's a little tiny bud there. If it wasn't quite so healthy, you would prune to that bud. And if you prune it, you're going to get more buds and it's going to get denser. And when some of them areas lignify, then you can start to form your foliage pads. Any bits that are pointing down, prune them off. It's keeping your bottoms nice and clean. So, now the only thing with procumbens, squamata, and a lot of the other needle type junipers is you get this old stuff that grows in. Now, this is quite normal, and what and if you can be bothered, you know how you get the old needles on the lignified stems. If you can be bothered with a pair of tweezers, it just neatens it up. But it's not essential, you know. Once it starts to get really dense with foliage, it'll actually hide quite a lot of that. But it's not a bad little tree. You just need to persevere with your pruning a little bit. Don't be frightened to prune and start to form some foliage pads. To me, if I was be tempted, I would nearly be tempted to get rid of that whole branch there. Right? Just because if you look how wide the tree is, right, with that branch, but with that branch gone, do you see how it kind of pulls it in and it gives you that more big tree image type of thing. But it's, and again, this is what I was saying about bonsai, it's your tree, you have to live with it in your garden. If you like it, that's great. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to say to you, you must cut that branch off. You like it, so therefore keep it. You could gin it, you know, it's entirely up to you. But yeah, just to get your foliage pads a lot more tighter, a little bit of pruning, but don't forget to feed. People don't feed as often as they should be. Which, while I'm on about it, I'll just quickly roll out and rabbit on about feed for I don't know how long. Obviously, people have said to me, well, your trees look really healthy. Well, there's a few reasons for that. I'm obsessed. The other is my garden's very good for pines and junipers. It's a bit of a heat trap. One of the other things is I water only when they need it. I don't just blanket water everything. So if I get up in the morning and go just before I go to work, I don't just blast everything. But I'm lucky, and I work local as a gardener, as well as obviously doing this as a job as well. But I work as a gardener in people's gardens. So therefore, at lunchtime, I whip home and I check my trees. So first thing on the morning, I might come downstairs. I get to see to these before I see to myself. So I do get dressed first, though I hasten to add. I go outside in the garden, and that one and that one might want a drink. So I'll give them a thorough drenching, and I mean a thorough drenching. But I'll wait until, with pines and junipers, I'll wait till approximately 70% of the growing medium's dry. Not as much on larch and deciduous trees, just you need to read your trees a little bit.
How do you know it's 70% dry?
Well, it's a bit of a difficult one. It's A, your growing medium, and there's another subject. And B, your garden and how much of a heat trap it actually is. And obviously, I mean this gets nearly bone dry before I water it. In fact, all of the pines do particularly. I might not let the junipers get as dry as the pines, but they'll, you know, they do get fairly dry. All I do is I'll just kind of rub, I don't just look, right? This is a common mistake people make. They'll go along and just look and go, well, that looks wet, but sometimes it's not. So give that a little bit of a rub, and right, there's still a little bit of moisture underneath that top surface, leave it alone. So then I'll come back at lunchtime and I'll have another look and go, right, that's dried out a bit more. That wants to drink that. I'm looking for moisture. If you're looking for moisture, water it. And this is fairly solid, so when I water that, it'll sit on the surface a bit. So then I'll go on to the next one and water that if it needs it. And you can imagine this one here is a bit of a nightmare. So I'll water that and it all whooshes off side. So I'll go on and water another one and come back, do another spray. The water's gone through that, I'll do another spray. And then I'll go around and look and go, right, what else is... And if they haven't had enough, but nothing else wants to drink, I'll go and have a cup of coffee, come back, another bit more. But I always make sure they get enough. Not just a little sprinkle, they get thoroughly soaked when they need it. But the key is to let them get dry-ish. The watering side of things over the years has been the thing that's been the most difficult to tell people. So you need to understand your own growing medium and what your garden's like, how well your trees are growing, because a really well, you can imagine all of this foliage here needs to be well saturated by the roots here. It needs to have a lot of roots and it needs to have a lot of fertiliser and a lot of water to keep this looking all nice and healthy, right? When people are on about needle size on pines, don't, or try not to, unless you're really experienced, try not to get your needle size down with using water. That's extremely dangerous, unless you know what you're doing, right? So, I've jumped a little bit there. So we've gone on from, I was going to talk about fertiliser and ended up talking about watering. So after I've done all my bit of watering, my fertiliser regime for keeping all of these looking tip-top, obviously it depends again on your development. A tree like this, which is still in development, it's still got some bare patches, I'm wanting to get back buds in here. This is why I brought this one along. This one gets fed a lot heavier than that one, and them two. But it doesn't mean they don't get fed at all. But again, people go, well, finished trees, you don't feed them or you feed them very little. You still need to feed them because you've got a lot of foliage here to look after. And if the tree's not getting any fertiliser, it's going to struggle, it's going to shed bits.
What do you use to feed them?
Well, for something like this, I'll be using fish emulsion and seaweed. Now again, we've been talking about this. Seaweed is not a fertiliser. Right, people are looking at us going, it's not a fertiliser, it's a stimulant. It needs to be used in conjunction with a proper fertiliser. Seaweed, if you look at the NPK of seaweed, it's only something like 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, or at the most 111. And it's got micronutrients in it. The tree needs macronutrients, which is your nitrogen, your phosphorus and your potassium, right? So that's why this is what I do, is, if your fertiliser regime works for you, fair enough, but what I do is fish emulsion, which is a fairly balanced, gentle fertiliser, and then I put seaweed in with that as well, mix the two together, and then I water it on once a fortnight. also once a fortnight, but in the interim, I'll use a foliar feed. Now I will mix up fishy brushing and seaweed and use that as a foliar feed, or I use Maxi Crops, the green bottled one, seaweed plus garden fertiliser, I think it's called, because it does speculate that it's a foliar feed as well. You can't use, often gets a little bit weaker, so I'll give that a bit of a spray, right? And on the top of drench foliar feed, I put solids on as well. I've got someone with a hand up there.
With the foliage feed, would you use like a normal hand bottle spray? Just gently
Yeah,
spray
just
that?
mix it up in a bucket, put it in a sprayer and just spray
gently
it on.
spray on the
Yeah.
particular area.
Make sure you get underneath, you know, because especially with some trees, the cuticles, which is believed how it goes into, as opposed to the stomata, is mainly on the underside of the leaves. So try to get kind of all over, just to be sure. So on top of that, I put on a solid fertiliser, and that can range from, because I do like to change them from time to time, that can range from Biogold to Kaizen's Green Dream, which I sometimes mix with seaweed meal. You can just buy that as a powdered stuff from a garden centre. And a stuff called Sumo that you used to be able to get. It's a French fertiliser, but I'm not sure you can get any more. And I mix all of that together and I sprinkle a little bit on.
As a powder or as biogold?
Well, the Biogold's in a pellet, although you can dilute. You can put 3 pellets in a litre of water and water it on, and that gets to the tree. Because a lot of people, it's right in a way. Sometimes the Biogold, it doesn't break down on the growing medium as well as it could do.
I tend to blitz it and then put it in water.
Yeah, but some people actually put it in the little baskets and put a bit of sphagnum moss on the top to keep it moist, and that helps quite a bit. So yeah, so I've changed my fertiliser around a little bit just to give them all different nutrients, right? Right, so...
And how often do you put that
well,
solids on?
The solid, it depends on the kind you're putting on. With the Biogold, I might change it every 3 months. With the Kaizen's Green Dream, I might change that every couple of months. Because the trouble with the Kaizen's Green Dream, it's a great fertiliser, but like as you know, when you water stuff, it washes off the top of the blinking pot, doesn't it? So, because sometimes I'll just sprinkle it on, or sometimes I'll put it in baskets.
Yeah.
Right, let's go into pines now. So,
Don't you ever dunk these at all in a bowl or anything?
yes, sometimes I'll do that with some of the smaller ones, but I can't do it with some of the bigger ones unless I'm going to give myself a hernia. So, but I have been known to make a big thing up and dump them. I'll sometimes do that with watering with some of the smaller ones, just to make sure that section right underneath the trunk is wet, because that bit dries out and often stays dry. Right, so, like I've got on my blackboard here, these are some of the main issues that we're going to go through where pines are concerned. So what we've got here, we've got a Scots pine, a Japanese black pine, and another Scots pine, right? So these two are round about, I suppose, finished level. This one is getting there, but it needs a little bit longer. It needs tighter ramification. It needs the needles coming down in size. So, how do you get the needles down in size? Well, you can try to watch your feeding, and the way to watch your feeding when it comes to not getting your needles too big, when the buds start to swell in the spring, you need to start putting fertiliser on.
Start or start?
Start to put fertiliser on, and that gives the tree a bit of a push. Around about, and it don't, whatever you do, ever go by off the calendar and say, right, April time or May time. The tree and the weather dictates what you do, not the calendar, because you know what our lovely British weather's like. You can't always go off. the seasons, as we know as well, do seem to have shifted a little bit. What we once did at one time of the year, we're not getting away with quite so much anymore. So about when the buds start to swell, so that could be any time from about March if we get a mild winter, so like early March, to about the end of March, even going in April if it's been a particularly rubbish one. So get your fertiliser on. If it's been a good spring, a good winter into spring, and the buds are well away and the candles are elongated, because you know the bud turns into a candle when it starts to elongate, you need to start taking the fertiliser off. When you start to see the needles start to peel away from the candle, you need to take the fertiliser off, because if you're at this stage, the needles are going to get too big. Trees are hungry things, they're opportunists. If the fertiliser's there, they'll have it. You know, they won't say, oh, well, I've had enough. I think I'll go and put my feet up. So, they're opportunists. If it's there, they'll have it. So, with a tree like this, I'm feeding quite heavily, and I'm forgetting. I'm not going to take the fertiliser off in mid-April. This is why you treat every tree differently. Fertiliser's going to stay on this all the time. Forget about what the needle size looks like. Yeah, the needle size at the minute are too long for the size of that tree. But I'm not bothered. Because if you think about each one of these needles as a solar panel, if it hasn't got as many, it wants as big as solar panels as it can get to be good for the tree. Once the tree ramifies up and gets a lot more twigs with a lot more needles on, the needle size in itself is going to come down on its own without an awful lot of help from you, right? So you can see this is Scots pine. It hasn't really, it hasn't had very much fertiliser, as people have well noticed, because it's lifting itself out of the pot. It hasn't been repotted in a while, which is another reason why some of the needle size starts to come down. Once that's repotted, the needles on this are going to, because it's got more space to grow, right? But it comes a point where it needs to be done. So needle size down, reduce your feeding, but on the right material. If it's material in development, doesn't matter, feed it. Doesn't matter about your needle size. So a needle size will come down on its own once it's ramified up and it's quite tight in a pot. That's the needle size coming down. Right, so candle pinching. Candle pinching on Scots pines. So let the candles come away. Again, maybe about an inch long. Depending, and this is the really awkward thing with explaining stuff with pines, because every single area you might think, I need to let that candle elongate a little bit because I need to fill that bit in. Don't just go along and go snap, 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 because if you want to fill an area in, you've just stopped it from elongating by just going along snapping. Just look at the tree all over, identify strong areas, weak areas, where does it need balancing out, where areas need to elongate. If it needs to elongate, leave the candle alone, let it grow. If it's quite full in other areas and you need to hold it back, get in there fairly early on, as I say, let the candle get about an inch long and snap it out. Now, I'll be coming to how many buds shortly, right? We're on about candle pinching at the minute, right? The bud selection is dealt with later on in the year. We're at the start of the year, we're on the candle pinching, so inch long. Snap the tip out on an area where you want to stop it growing. We've got someone with a handle.
How much of that candle are you taking out on the Scots?
Sorry?
How much of the candle are you taking out on the Scots pine? Imagine it's the top and it's strong. How much are you taking out of that candle?
Generally, what you want to try to do is you want to try and leave about 10 or 12 pairs of needles. And when you see the candle, and you only see the little V of the needles that you starting to develop on the candle. If you're clever, you can look and go, I mean, you're not to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, just kind of on average, so that you come along and you think, right, that's going to leave me about 10 pairs of needles. I'll snap the tip out there and leave about 10 pairs of needles, because what you want is you want 10 pairs of needles all over, and that's going to balance your tree out well, right? So candle pinching, so that's that part of it done. Is there any other questions? Yeah.
What about when the candles turn to flowers?
Right,
So you've got a good...
another good question. Now, this tree, funnily enough, a few years ago, produced masses of flowers. Masses and masses. Right? So, unfortunately, you've got to almost write that year off, in a way. Just let it grow freely. Unless it's a very, you know what, you've got a candle, and obviously you get the bit underneath with all the little bits where the flowers are. Yeah. If you've got a very, very strong section on the end, by all means, snap the candle. And again, leaving 10 pairs of needles on it. Maybe leave a little bit more because you're writing that year off, right? Then flowers will drop off a little bit later on and you're left with a bare stem, right? So what you do then is, over the year, you know you're going to be writing it off because it's produced masses of flowers. You need to feed it well because you want it to back bud. So pile loads of fertiliser in it. Come the back end of the growing season, end of July to mid-August, come in and prune the lot off. Now that sounds really,
So that means you've lost all this year's
exactly. That's why you need to fertilise it really well. And that's why you prune them off at that time of the year. Because the tree is then moving from growth and elongating the needles to putting on buds for next year. That's why you prune it at that time of the year, right? You prune all of that off, but be careful not to prune out any weak stuff. If there's any weaker stuff further in, just leave it, right? And I did that with this tree a few years ago. It had loads of flowers on, all over. And honestly, I had to just write it off, and it looked well out of bits all over the place. It looked shocking. Can't believe it.
Do you always wait till the flowers drop off on their own, or can you kind of help them along a bit?
That is a good question, and I would say unless you've got nothing else to do, by all means have a little go, but
it's quite fun knocking the little flowers off. It's quite nice.
Well, it is. It's quite satisfying to squeezing the spot, isn't it?
It's quite therapeutic.
I'm a bit of a sadness.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have done it myself.
On my white pine, I can see that obviously the size of the millimetre. I can tell if they're a bud or a flower, and I take them off then.
It is quite satisfying actually taking them off. But I've got a big Mugo and it flowers its socks off every flipping year. Every flipping year, and I can guarantee. In fact, I know it's going to flower next year because the buds on it are, you know, when they get really fat and massive, and you just know they're flower buds then. I know they are.
Well, I took the tiny buds off. On the premise that might be wrong, but it seems to work, to stop that bald extension.
Right.
So I thought the sooner I take them off, the less chance I've got of this extension of nothing on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, you might know better because you've actually tried that. But the trouble with knocking them off is you can actually damage the stem itself. Now, you could say, well, if you're going to cut it off, what does it matter? But the thing is, what you want to do is you want them to still leave that new growth to do something for the tree during the growing season, right?
So the flowers aren't taking any goodness away from the tree, are they?
Well, you know how, I mean, again, this is a debatable thing. A lot of people will say it is taking energy away from the tree because the tree's wanting to put its energy into producing flower. And sometimes at the ends of some of the flowering stems, the candle is a little minuscule, crappy little thing that doesn't really look like it's going to do very much. In some areas, it's pretty big, you know. So that's debatable, but when you look at larch, people go, oh, but the larch cones are really nice, let's just leave them on. Now, I've known over the years, and I've seen it on big trees out in nature and on bonsai trees, if you leave too many flower cones on a larch, that branch, if left too long, can die off. It's taking too much energy. So just be aware. But I have to say though, where pines are concerned, once they get past a certain stage, it's used that energy anyway. Do you know what I mean? So you're not really helping. But just be aware that if you knock off the flowers and the stem that's left behind, sometimes you can damage the stem a little bit and then the whole stem dies off. So just be very careful.
Would that be the same for spruce?
For what? For spruce?
For cedar, sorry, not spruce.
For cedar. I haven't actually known cedar produce masses of flowers. You might know better than me, but there are species of tree that I don't work with very often, which is a bit of a shame, to be honest, because they're a very nice, elegant tree, to be fair. So I can't quite rightly tell you where cedar's concerned, but I would imagine most things that are producing flower and cones are putting a lot of energy into that, so I would presume it's a pretty similar sort of thing. So just going back to the pines and the flowering, what you need to do there is just leave them, let the flowers drop off on their own, let the needles do their thing, let them get big, whatever, so that they're photosynthesizing for the tree. Remember, the new growth is always more productive for the tree than the old stuff is, and this is why we always need to rejuvenate all the time. As we know, 3-year-old needles drop off anyway. So you need to keep your new stuff to do more for the tree. So come the end of the growing season, tends to be end of July to mid-August, sometimes again, not going by the calendar, at the end of August, you come in and chop the lot off. Because what the tree's doing there, it's changed its growth pattern from elongating them needles, it's matured them off, and now it's wanting to produce buds for next year. So you catch it at that time, when it's wanting to produce buds, right? So don't worry, I did exactly the same thing on this tree, right? So we've partly covered, by going on about the flowers, the pruning of pines. So if you're wanting to get back budding on pines, yes, candle pinching is going to produce a little bit of back budding, but you only candle pinch when a tree is kind of at this stage. Don't candle pinch too early in a pine's development, because you're restricting it, you're stopping it getting to this stage earlier, right? So what you need to do is you need to let it grow, and then you need to prune it with scissors at the end of the growing season, which is kind of what we're doing with the pruning where the flowers are concerned. It's the same sort of thing. We're getting in there, we're pruning with scissors, right? But what you're doing is, you'll go through the tree and you'll have a look and you'll think, right, because if you're wanting stuff, you know how people, they'll style a Scots pine and the foliage is right out here, and we'll spaghettify the branches to pull it all in to get you the image that you want. And that's fine, that's showing you where you want to go with it. But it doesn't stay like that. It never stays like that. You need to cut out that spaghettification over time. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get buds along them spaghettified branches. So you need to cut back. So if you've got, for the sake of argument, you've got 2 here, right? If you had a little bud in there and it was just tiny with a few needles on it, you can't cut it back to that tiny little bud with a few needles on. It's not strong enough on its own to hold its own, right? The tree will just abort that branch. That's not enough sap getting pulled back and forwards for it to hang on to that branch. So you'll have to do it in stages. So if you've got a bud back here that you want to keep, prune out one of these and keep the other one. That damage to the tree, thank you very much, I'll force this back bud in, this little bud in here, to start to come away and get a bit stronger, and then next year or the year after you can take that one off and let the smaller one take over. Does that make sense? Right? So it's not just about candle pinching. A lot of people with pines get themselves that worked up about candle pinching. That is the be all and end all of getting your back button and getting your ramification. People do candle pinching way too early. Right? I'm looking at some of the pines over there. The big tall one, you do not want to be candle pinching on that at all. Way too early to be doing candle pinching. Scissor pruning, yes. Not candle pinching. Possibly even the other one at the bottom there to its left. That one there. I wouldn't worry about your needle size. I wouldn't worry too much about candle pinching too much on that. Just get it healthy, get it strong. Get that motor running in its roots. And then prune it back in the end of the summer, end of the growing season. You'll get buds popping back, and then you can start taking out them longer branches, and you get tighter foliage. But one of the other things that you do when you prune back at the end of the growing season, and this one often gets missed, it's not just pruning branches. The new growth that is developed over the growing season, you might have an extension that's been about that long. That's how long that candle has got. Right? You'll have a bud in the end. So what you'll do is to get better back budding, and I'll show you on this pine, because a lot of the time, as I say, people say do this, do that, but without seeing what the result is at the end. Right? So what you would do, the new growth, as I say, you'd come along and you'd actually cut the end bit out, which has got that bud in the end, and you're thinking, oh, shit. But if you do it at the right time of the year, the amount of buds you'll get, because that's the tree is producing bud at that time of the year. And if at break time you want to come up and have a look, and you can see where I've cut out, there's a section there, that was this year's growth. I've pruned the end out, and there's a bud there, there's a bud there, there's a bud at the back there, and that's how you tackle pines.
Would that be when the needles have hardened off?
You what, sorry?
Would that be when the needles
when
have
the
hardened
needles
off?
have hardened off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's when it's changed its growth pattern.
Sorry, yeah, and on white pines there's a sheath at the bottom of the needles, and
Yeah.
that falls away.
Let that fall off.
Yeah.
It's kind of an orangey colour.
Yeah.
Let that fall off. The needles have matured.
And that's the time to cut.
That's the time to do the pruning. Right?
So what you look for in a Scottish?
A Scotty, the needles are the same as a black pine. The needles will generally have taken on the same colour the whole length of the needle.
Right.
I mean, these are still elongating. Black pines often elongate quite a long time. I mean, as I said before, these will be elongating still into November.
Yeah.
If you were to pull these needles, you see how they come out really easy, and you see the different colour on the end. You see how it's a lot lighter on that end. That's there still elongating. Whereas on this one, even a one that's got a bud in the end, I'm pulling that, it's not coming out.
Yeah.
Right? That's matured. That one hasn't.
Yeah.
Right? So that's when you think, pruning to be done on that to get back budding, not on that yet. The needles are still elongating. Right? So, these are the...
Is it reasonable to, if you're looking at your pine and thinking,
when you want to cut it back, is it reasonable to be watching for buds forming and then think, I'm going to do it now? You know, as soon as you see buds forming.
Well, the trouble is, you don't want to let the buds get too big before you prune back.
No.
You see, the buds in the ends of here, these now are quite big.
Yeah.
What you've quintessentially done, if you prune them, you've wasted a hell of a lot of the tree's energy there, right?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can't guarantee that now, because it's going past that time, we're getting into October now, that the tree's going to start to produce buds further back. Chances are it might, because they're pretty tough, but you might not get as many, because it's thinking about going dormant, you see.
Yeah, I did a Scots about 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, and I could see the buds forming on the end, but they were tiny.
Right in the ends?
Yeah.
Well, if they're just little, you're probably all right.
I cut it back and it's budded again, no problem at all. There's 3, 4, 5 buds on the end.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, is that a reasonable way of judging?
Yeah, no, that would work, but just don't let the buds in the ends get massive.
No.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, just keep an eye on them.
Just keep an eye on them, because you're just going to waste the tree's energy. In some instances, you want to waste the tree's energy if it's really, really vigorous.
Yeah. No, I'm on about a tree that I'm trying to develop rather than refine like.
Yeah. Right. Any other questions about that?
Can we have a break?
Right, so a couple of other things that we haven't quite hit on when it comes to the Scotties. We mentioned candle pinching and we jumped into pruning because we were on about the flowers. So we've got to mention needle removal and bud selection. Right, these are all important key points with pines, right? And honestly, if there's anything that I haven't made clear where any of the things concerned, just shout out, I'll try my best to explain. Needle removal is obviously done in a couple of different stages, right? So, does everybody know why we would remove the needles on pines? What would we be removing needles for?
Light. Create light.
Yeah. So light, balance of
Does
the
it
tree.
move energy elsewhere or?
Yeah, that's part of the balance of the tree, right? Because we want it to have even growth all the way around the tree. Now if you remember what I said before, identify your weak areas and your strong areas. If an area is really weak, don't take any needles off it, or very, very few. If it's a strong area, which often tends to happen in the apex of the tree, take more off, right? Leaving 10 pairs of needles. Now, if a weak area is particularly weak, don't remove needles in the strong area so that it's got the same amount of needles as a particularly strong area. That's just too much for the tree. Do a little bit of a middleman, right, in between. And then the following year, when the weak area has caught the strong area up a bit more, then maybe balance them out by taking off equal amounts. And this needs to be done throughout the tree's life. And as you say, it's to let light and air in, so that it'll back bud in here. If there's no light that gets in there, it's not as likely to back bud. It needs light on the branches to back bud. So, but the main thing about it is the balancing of the growth, so that it's equal all the way around. Now, this can be done in the spring. You can take off some of the old needles from the year before as the new ones are coming out, but obviously not too many. But the main time of the year to do it is generally about September, or kind of getting into October time, so that the new buds that are coming through, yeah.
Would you cut or pluck?
Again, that's it's up to you. I personally would cut, and cut quite close, but leave a little stub. And I'll tell you the reason why I would is, as many of you might have noticed on that tree, when some of the new buds occur, they occur from in the middle of two needles. And if you cut them off, sometimes you're cutting off some of the buds there. They don't always back bud there, but a lot of the time they do. One of the other reasons why I use scissors a bit more, A, it's faster, and B, if you pull and you try to, and you start getting a bit impatient because it's a bit of a laborious task, sometimes you get hold of more than one pair of needles, and you'll end up ripping some of the bark off, and then the little twig dries because it dries out.
What length of needle would you cut it to?
Oh, just literally about 2-3 millimetres. Yeah. And that in itself, if there's no bud in there, it'll dry up and drop off anyway. If there is a bud in there, light will be able to get into it and it'll come into its own. Yeah. Right? So that's your kind of September type of job. So at the end of September, coming into October, the tree's been producing lots of buds. So this one here that it was cut back in the end of July, it's got lots of buds all over. But just because it's produced lots of buds doesn't mean I'm going to keep them all. This is where your bud selection comes in. Right? So any buds that are in the wrong location, they're either on the underside, in a crotch where there's already lots of things, get rid of them. You're not doing the tree any favour just by keeping every single bud just because it's put that on. If there's nothing else, okay. But if there's lots, reduce them down a little bit. Another key is the ones in the ends, and this is why I didn't mention this about the candle pinching at the beginning, because it's this time of the year that the buds in the ends have started to develop, and it's then that you make a selection of which ones that you're going to keep, right? So that you don't have to do, you know how people go, well, do you snap out the middle one, or snap it in half, and then take the tip out the medium-sized one and leave the smaller one? You don't have to bother with that, because in October, you've done your bud selection, and you always take it down to 2. Everything. Once a branch leaves the trunk and splits off, it goes from 2 into 2. I can feel a drone coming on here. Right? So you've got your trunk here, and you've got your branch coming out, and that splits off into 2, and then that splits off into 2, and that splits off into 2. And that's how you build the structure of your tree. Right? Foliage pad. That's how you build it. From 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. So when you start getting 3 buds in the end, and take the strong middle one out, unless the really weak one is just really weak and feeble and a bit of a run to the litter. And in which case, just get rid of that one, because you know it's not going to do anything. Right? So,
How do you grow you talked about fillers when we were talking about these.
Yeah.
You do the same with those?
Yeah, I mean, how you style a pine and a juniper is similar, as in you lay your base pad out. So again, you lay that base pad out like that, so you've got, these are your base branches. So then if you're looking at this from the side, you've got a branch coming down like that. You know, conifers often have this sweeping movement, and it's flat on the bottom, but you've got a dome of foliage on the top. And them ones there are some of the other ones that have come off here.
Are they from backbuds?
And they form your filler on the top.
Are they from backbuds in subsequent years then?
Possibly.
Yeah.
You know, where you've got that crotch growth.
Yeah.
And then eventually, you know what I was saying about taking some of the stuff off to stop it from getting too long.
Yeah.
So eventually how that grows out, and the foliage part gets longer and longer. So what you do is you come in and you prune out some of that lot there, and you get back to there again. So it's a case of, you've got that foliage pad here, and it's continually growing out like that, and you've got the filler in the top. And as it all starts to grow out, you take off some of the bottom stuff, and the filler that's in the top takes over because you've got some new filler in the top there. So it's a constant case of you're doing this all the time.
So your filler eventually becomes your pad?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And how you build a foliage pad on a juniper and on a pine is pretty similar, apart from obviously the definition on a juniper. That's why I like them so much. The detail is a lot more fine because of the type of foliage that it is. But you can still get really quite tight foliage pads with pines. You can imagine all the needles. And you still get that kind of tight foliage pad on the top there, right? But with your bud selection, if you do it in October, you're not wasting the tree's energy at the beginning of the year. You've already knocked them buds on the head and you're using 2, right? Always 2. Now I know some of you are going to say, well, some of my pines only have 1 in the end. Well, if it's only got 1, just keep 1. And then let it grow, feed it well, prune it back hard in the end of July, end of the summer. You'll get some back buds, that'll rejuvenate it, and you'll start getting more back budding and filling in that way. Right? Does all of this make sense, or am I talking rubbish here? I'm surprised any of you can understand us with my accent. So bud removal and selection, we've talked about the needle removal. So now we've mentioned Scots pines, and obviously Scots pines we do candle pinching on. Black pines, on the other hand, right, there's a few variants with this. In Japan, and they call this makiri. You might have heard this being used when it comes to yews. We do use a thing called the makiri technique on yew. It just means removal of soft growth. And it's the decandling, right? Now in Japan, they will decandle their pines in June. And you'll see a lot of people putting on Facebook thing and says, well, the Japanese are doing their pines, I'm going to do my pines. Where you need to do it a lot earlier over here, because we don't get the growing season they do, right? So this one, and you can imagine, this was done in mid-May. Now bear in mind, okay, yes, we've had a bit of a pants summer. June was great, everything after that was a load of rubbish. It's just done now but rain. This probably will go underneath me grow light for a few weeks, maybe a month or so, just to give it a kick up the backside a little bit more. But as I showed you before, the needles are still growing. It hasn't matured yet. So, black pines in this country, yes. A lot of people treat black pines like a Scotty, and that's fine. But if you're going to do it that way, you're always going to have big needles, fairly big needles. These needles here, see it's got a bit of a Mohican going on at the minute, they are the ones that weren't candle removed in mid-May, which is when I did it, because I wanted to get these a bit stronger. And what I'll do later on, because again I'm always leaving 2 buds, when you decandle, you'll sometimes get 2 or 3 coming from the base of where you cut the candle from. That'll come out all together. That'll come out all together. That one there, I'll probably leave that, but I'll just cut the needles because there's a dip in the foliage there. Do you see what I mean? There's a bit of a dip there. So if I prune that out all together, you see there's a dip. So you need to bear this in mind before you just tackle everything the same. So, decandling a black pine. What you need to do is, and it scares the living hell out of people the first time they do it, the buds, the candles, at the start of the year, elongate, they get quite strong. What you need to do is, and this is completely different from this, you prune out the weak ones first. You don't do it all in one go. Prune the weak ones out first, and then maybe in a week's time, prune the medium ones out, and then in another week's time, prune the strong ones out. And I'll explain why. You prune the weak ones out, so that by the time you've pruned the strong ones out, the weak ones, where they were, have produced some more buds. So by the time the strong ones have caught up with the weak ones, they're all of even growth. Do you see what I mean?
You're giving the weak and the head start.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're doing. You're giving them a head start.
Yeah.
Right?
Does that apply to red pine as well?
Does that apply
to the red pine?
Yeah. Yeah. Japanese red as well. Yeah. Now, if you feel another drone coming on, so if you imagine you've got your stem, like so, and there's the bud in the end, there's the needles, right? So you're always leaving the same pairs of needles, that's the bud in the spring, right? So it gets longer, and then it might get a little bit longer, and you might get another little bud at the end there, right? So, and you might have another bud, another twig here. And again, it's got a tiny little bud in the end. So, first week you come in and you cut that one out, and you cut it as flush and as flat to the needles as possible, right? Don't cut it at an angle because you'll restrict the growth coming back. If it's a strong one in a few weeks' time and it's really strong, leave a little bit of a stub because the tree thinks the bud's still there and it's quite slow to cotton on. Oh, there's no bud there. I need to put some new buds out. So by the time this one that's been cut and produced a bud there and a bud there, this one that you did a few weeks later, it's got a bud there and a bud there, and they're both pretty even. And then you can cut that off a little bit more, right? And eventually they'll all start to catch up with one another, right? Does that make sense?
And you can't do that with Scotties?
No, most definitely not, right? It's a kind of, that kind of thing there with a Scots pine. Remember what I was saying at the end of the summer when you're pruning back? So you've got an extension, and it's got the bud on the end, and this is early on in the spring. And then as this elongates and the needles slowly start to peel off the candle, and you're letting it grow, and then that extends out a bit more and the needles start to get bigger. Does this make sense? Yeah. And then it might extend a little bit more, and then by the end of the summer, the needles are a similar length. They might be a bit smaller, they might be a little bit longer, depending on the growing season, how much you fertilise it, how much water it's had. And this is if you just let it go, right? You start to get a little bud in the end. Nothing too big, like what was said before. So what do? You come in here, and this is the new growth. That bit here is last year's. All of that's last year's growth. So you come in and cut out, see that bit there. So you're cutting out the bud that was in the end and some of this year's needles, right? And because you've done that, the tree goes into panic mode and it starts to put in buds. It'll produce some here, it might produce some here, and on the lignified bit back here, you might even get some back there, right? So it's not just about candle pinching, right? And it's the same with the black pines, it's not just about decandling. Now decandling, in this country, I'd maybe do it every other year. Give your tree a year off every now and again, because it's quite a, it's quite a lot to ask of the tree. It's the same with defoliation on a tree. People get so wound up about leaf size and that. If the tree's not healthy, don't do it. It's so stressful for the tree. And don't do it every year. Give the tree some time off. So this tree, with it being quite a sizable black pine, it was done in mid-May. And you can see mid-May, and while in Japan they're doing it in June, mid-May, and you see the needles are still only that. Now if the summer had been like last year, the chances are they would have been a bit bigger. But because it hasn't, we had a nice hot June, and then it went downhill after that, and it hasn't really picked up much since. The needles are still quite small. So by the time they're finished, their needles are going to be about that big, which is going to be round about the right sort of size for this tree. Mid-May. Now, if you imagine if you'd done that in June, them needles would be like that, and the chances are they're not going to be, particularly very big and helpful for the tree. So just bear that in mind. But the trouble is, it's trying to gauge what the heck the weather's going to do.
Just to pick up on, a black pine in Japan is called a dual flush.
You what, sorry?
A dual flush pine. Flushes
yes,
tall.
that's right, yeah.
We wouldn't be doing that in this country, would we?
Well, this is what, this has been done.
Did you say, the point I'm trying to make is, in Japan, will they repeat what you just described a second time later in the year? Because it's
you mean they'll do it again?
Yes.
Yeah. No chance over here.
No, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. You can do it once,
yeah,
but not twice.
Yeah. But in Japan, they probably do it twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Are all pines classed as like single flush in this country?
It's Nonia species. Most two-needled pines. This is a two-needled pine, that's a two-needled pine. This is a double flush, that's a single flush. Yeah. But your Japanese white pine is only a single flush pine as well. Right. So don't treat that like this or the red pine, otherwise you're in trouble.
What she's saying about taking the candles off, she's treating it as a double flush. Yeah. But it's about timing.
Yeah.
About timing, you can do it.
Because that one over there put 2 lots out this year, put the second lot out later on, but...
And also, one thing that we haven't hit on at all, and I feel like we should, is growing medium. Dun dun dun, it's a thing that everybody seems to get really wound up about, yeah?
Before you go on to that, can I ask about NPK? NPK?
NPK?
What would be your advised levels of NPK for fertiliser?
Right, well, on the black pine, when it's been decandled, I'll give it quite a bit of fertiliser to give it a push to get them buds going. But once the needles have started to come away, if the weather's good, I'll take that fertiliser off. Otherwise, I'm going to be back to square one again. The more fertiliser I give it, the needles are just going to...
So quite a low level, like in 555.
Remember, there's still a lot of foliage here. It still wants fertiliser, right? So, and I still give it pretty much a similar sort of fertiliser as I do everything else, just less often. So I still give it the fish emulsion and seaweed. I still put the slow release on the top of the pot. If there was a weak area on it, like sometimes that lower branch had started to catch up with the rest of the tree, but that one there was always a little bit weak. That's been foliar fed and it's started to catch up now. So...
And my other question is, how do you get a thicker trunk?
Stick it in the ground. You knew I was going to say that, didn't you?
Yeah, I was going to say.
To be honest, it's the best way to get a thicker trunk. A tree will thicken over time in a pot, but it'll take a hell of a long time. And that includes putting it in a bigger pot. One of the things that you've got to think about, especially if it's just a little kind of small kind of thing, small tree, if the root system on that tree isn't massive, and you stick it in a massive oversized pot, that root system isn't strong enough, it's not well developed enough to pull the water from that growing medium fast enough so it's going to stay wet longer. And consequently, what happens if they stay wet too long? You get root rot, right? And people forget about that. It stays cold. It doesn't suck out the water quite so much, right? So to get the trunks thick and to grow them on, the best thing to do, honestly, is to put them in a growing bed. I know not everybody has the space or the time to be doing that, but that is the best way to do it.
So you continue with pruning the top?
Yes, don't just put it in a growing bed and forget about it. You still need to work the tree, and you'll still need to lift it every now and again and deal with the roots and put it back, otherwise the roots will be away and it'll be a nightmare to get out of the ground.
You mentioned earlier that you would put under a grow light. What kind of grow light setup have you got? Is it like in the greenhouse?
Not one of the marijuana ones.
What do you do like?
You bring your own.
I've got a, I think it's called Millard. It's a big square, long, and it's got 4 daylight tubes in it. The trouble is you actually need it quite low to the tree to be any benefit, because if you get a light meter, a lux meter, and you hold it there, the needle might whop up to about 900, but you just have to drop it down here and it flies back down again. So you have to get the tree quite high up to it.
Sounds like them lights what they use when they're growing marijuana.
Well, it kind of is, but the marijuana ones, at least nowadays, apparently, I don't know.
It's exactly the same principle.
Well, it is. But they all seem to have these ultraviolet and infrared jobby things attached to them.
Red and blue light.
Yeah,
but
and
all plants use red.
Yeah, of course they do,
red
it's just
and
we
blue
can't
light.
see it.
Yeah.
But I do know somebody who bought one of these lights, and she had all of the stuff so that the light was shining up here, and she burnt her trees. So be careful.
So do you have that set outside then?
Is that, sorry, what?
Is that set up in a greenhouse or something then?
Yeah, well, my workshop's got a polycarbonate roof on it, so it gets light in, and it's got big window down one side, so it's kind of like a greenhouse. It gets bleeding hot in the summer.
Don't you get helicopters going over at night to see heat source?
I've got a story about that. Me and my friend Len were making up a massive, great big, large group planting, and we were on till midnight putting it all together. And the police helicopter came. We often used to get regularly over the top. You know Len Gilbert, don't you? And and we'd just finished, and we were standing outside with our cans of lager going, yeah, we're finished. And the police helicopter came over the top, and it hovered over the top. It always did, because of these lights shining through. and we looked up and the searchlight was on down at us, and we just went with a car, and it dipped its lights and went off. So, yeah, sorry, what was your question?
Well, I think you have to must one. I've got another question. So, would you put it on? So you're saying you're going to put it on at the end of the year? Would you put it on at the start of the year as well to give it a head start?
I have had it on a timer before, and all I'm trying to do is just extend the day length. So I'm fooling the tree and thinking that it's got a little bit longer than it actually has. So we know the mornings are getting dark now. It's still dark, kind of 6:30, getting on for nearly 7 o'clock. It's just starting to get light. And then it's starting to get dark now at about 7 o'clock sort of time. So I'll put the timer on so that the light comes on. I don't know if it annoys the neighbours or not, like, but so it'll come on maybe about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it'll go off about 9 o'clock at night, so that the tree thinks it's kind of, you know,
15 hours long.
Aye, do you know what I mean? And it's worked for us before in the past. I've got another couple of black pines, Shohin, Kifu, and always seems to work all right. Unfortunately, with the blinking electricity costs now, it's a little bit...
Would you not just put it on, if you want to extend the day length, if it's getting light at 7 in the morning, would you not put it on at 6 and let it switch off at 8? Because...
Well, you can do, yeah.
And then again in the evening.
Yeah, well...
because the amount of light you're adding during the day will be negligible compared to the lumens.
Well, as I say, it's like, it comes, I would say I would put it on, say, about 6:30 in the morning, and it goes, it'll might go off at 9 o'clock at night. Or...
Yeah, what I'm saying is you're burning it all
oh no, I
hours
see what you
during
mean,
the day.
through the day. Oh yeah, no, it's not on through the day when it's daylight. Yeah.
You're just adding 2 hours.
I'm just adding a few hours in the morning and a few hours in the evening.
Yeah.
That's
I was
right,
trying to serve you a few quid.
Thanks.
And that's spring and autumn? Just autumn?
No, I don't generally do it in the spring. It's just in the autumn when I want to kind of like push the needles. As I say, I might want to push the needles on this. They're still growing. I just want them to get a little bit longer. So I might just give it a bit of a boot.
Would you just, I mean, there's a certain temperature which photosynthesis ain't going to happen. So it's pointless putting on it. Substrate.
No, but it does get quite warm under the under the grow light as well.
It needs to be above about 5 degrees C.
I think I'm trying to. I can't remember me flipping botany thing again. But you're right. There is a certain temperature when plants stop growing.
Below 5 degrees C, there's no.
Yeah, below 5 degrees, definitely not. And that's one of the reasons why trees also need a dormant period of approximately 12 weeks to keep them happy and healthy. If they're continually growing all the time because you've got light on them or you've got heat on them or whatever, you start getting tired. You need the need to go through dormancy. Mind you saying that black pines, not so much. They can keep going on and on and on. But Scotties, definitely, they're from a temperate zone. They need to have a little bit of a sleep. So, yes, they're always kind of slightly ticking over, but they still need to go dormant a little bit.
So, does the black pine come from a warmer climate? Do they have less harsh winters?
The Japanese black pine obviously comes from Japan, and it's mainly from on the coastal regions. Yeah. So they can actually put up with a lot of heat and a lot of salt. And it's the only pine that will grow in California, this bonsai. Or one of the only pines. Right. Because the trouble with California is it's hot all year round. It doesn't get a break, and that's why these would struggle, because they need a break. And even the kind of the American species, the ponderosa pine, the limber pine, won't grow in California. It's too hot all year round. Yeah.
Can we quickly do substrate before can we do substrate before I run out of time? Right,
yeah. Now, it's the thing that causes the most arguments, so I'm going to start one. Yeah. Right, I know everybody has different ways of doing it, and when it comes to raw material, stuff that you're trying to grow on, even then, I would be tempted not just to bung it in any old muck, right? You still want a really good grown medium. You want good roots on that tree to maximise what you're going to get out of it. Now, I'll tell you what I grow mine in. You lot will all have your different ideas. All of these trees grow in 50-50 Akadama and Kiryu. And that's all. That is all. And to me, they're me babies. And I'm not putting them in any old muck. Because, literally, I want them best for these trees as possible.
Is Kiryu that great stuff?
Yeah. Kiryu, the Japanese call it river sand. The better Kiryu, I remember you used to be able to get it in bags and there was lumps in it like this and it was bloody awful. Can you remember that? But now we get better quality stuff and it's all fairly even and it's pretty good. The minerals in that in Kiryu is fantastic and the trees just absolutely love it. And in Japan they will grow pines in 100% Kiryu. And as I say, they call it river sand. And often, when a tree isn't very well, they will plant it in a box in pure Kiryu. Now, junipers in particular, when they go sick, they can be a nightmare to pull back. An absolute nightmare. And I've pulled back a couple of people's, not always, I've had me failures because they can be tricky. But there was a friend of mine brought a tall one round and it was looking a bit yellow and a bit sickly and some branches. So we knocked it out of the pot. It had one drainage hole in the bottom of the pot. And even then it was looking a bit, like it was getting a bit bunged up. The soil, the growing medium hadn't been sieved correctly. The dust was blocking the drainage hole. We all know junipers like a good free draining mix and they like to dry out significantly between watering and not stay wet for too long. So we knocked it out of the pot. You could see fundamentally that there was quite a lot of root death there. So we cleaned off a lot of the dying roots and we planted it in a tray in pure Kiryu. Now okay, it took time, but we pulled that tree back round. And I've got another one back at home at the minute. It's doing a similar sort of thing, which I also sprayed with, and we've been talking about this. But whether or not this has had anything to do with it, I don't know. But I sprayed it with that HB 101. Again, I don't know. It's the first time I've really ever tried it. This last year I got it at Expo. But the growing tips on the juniper are romping away. So, but yeah, 50-50 Akadama and Kiryu. People go shout on, oh, but Akadama breaks down. Akadama's meant to break down. It's what trees do to the growing medium. It's meant to do that. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You know your roots are really working when it breaks the Akadama down. Okay, it's a bit of a nightmare when you're watering, it sits on the top, but it gets through eventually. And as long as you go back and water again and it gets through eventually, or you dunk it in water and you leave it there for half an hour until the bubbles stop, that's great. But it's that drying out between waterings that's key. Right, I know, I mean, you can probably see this. This is just, I was just saying to someone before, this has just been slip potted out of here. You'll notice the colour of this and the colour of that slightly different. There's a slightly more yellowy hue about that than there is about that. That's not a sign of overwatering. With junipers, that's a sign it wants a bit more root space. They'll go a slightly off colour. So you think, right, that tree wants a little bit of space. So it was knocked out of its original pot, put in something slightly bigger, just temporarily, and filled in. So this is the growing medium I use. Oh, disaster. You can't really... I'm trying to get a bit of Kiryu in that as well. So, there's the Akadama. You tell what it's like when it's wet. It's dark brown. And there's the Kiryu. That's harder to break up, but it still breaks up. And what I've also got in here, and I don't know if any of you guys have used it yet, is Karen O'Hanlon, you know, who makes the Danu, the bacteria that you water on your trees. She produces this other stuff in a bag called biochar. And all my trees have a little bit of that in it. And I think that does help.
10%.
Eh?
She's done some field trials on it. 5 to 10% of volume is the optimum. If you use more, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
But 5 to 10% is optimum.
One of the other things, I mentioned growing medium. I find that works for me. As you can see, the trees look pretty healthy. But when it comes to repotting, again a subject we haven't quite touched on, people repot far too often. Conifers.
Can I just say something? You know that tree there? You know when you said about putting it in mug? That's been in that pot. We don't know how long, but we know for at least 35 years. And it was potted in mug. And his mother will never have put food on it. And it looks pretty green.
Well, it will be, but you've also got to think about if it's been in there for 35 years.
Yes. I want to get it out, but I don't know when to do it. And put it in a pot.
It should be at a further level if it was fed, if it was in a better growing medium.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But you're right, it's looking, it's
I
still
mean,
looking nice and
considering
healthy.
it's been ill-treated for that amount of time. It's not looking bad, I don't think.
I don't think it looks bad at all.
No.
Yeah.
Because it'll not have been watered. You know when it got dry, she'll never have gone to back again.
Well, fortunately with it being a pine, that wasn't going to be so much of an issue. It would take a little bit more dryness than what other species would. If that had been a larch, or spruce even, it wouldn't have liked it. But because it's a pine, junipers again, it would have coped with it a little bit more.
Good job, really.
But yeah, repotting. People repot too often, conifers, right? I've got a Pines and Junipers at home, and it's been in the same pot, untouched, for over 25 years. The tree's happy, it's healthy, the buds are good, the needles are good. So why do you want to repot it? Do you know what I mean? Why repot it? If the trees are happy and healthy, don't repot them. You know, unless you've changed the design, the angle's slightly changed, you've got a new pot for it. And when you repot conifers, don't go crackers, don't go mental with a root hook, and they don't like too much root disturbance, right? Just be gently good. And the older the tree is, the less vigorous you want to be. It won't put up with quite as much. A young tree will put up with quite a lot of things you can throw at it. But an old tree, no. And it'll tell you. You'll start shedding branches. You might even kill the tree. Always leave a section of the growing medium in here untouched. And I remember this is where I'm on about Michael Hagedorn's book again. He mentions in it when repotting's concerned. In Japan, they'll take a tree out the pot, they'll take about 1 inch, maybe 2, around the outside, a bit off the bottom, put it back in the same pot. The section under there, he said, and he really wanted to push the point across. He says, I'm going to say this in bold letters. This section under here has been untouched for decades. So, and it's true, people we do hang on with the roots far too often. Yes, that wants a repot because it's starting to push itself out of the pot, as you can see. But it's still happy, it's still healthy. The buds on it are still good.
Tree, that's all. It just wants to be a bigger tree.
You see, that's it. It's feel like it needs to be higher up, like this one, so it's pushing itself up. Another thing that often gets mentioned about timing of repotting. A lot of people, yes, they repot in the autumn. They'll say, right, repot, especially mugo pines and things like that. Yes, it obviously works for some people, but I have to say, in my 30-odd years of doing bonsai, I've only ever done repotting in the spring, and I've never lost anything. And on pines, junipers, I've never lost a twig in the spring. So all I can think of, yes, people must get away with it, and that's fine, it does happen. But I just feel that in the spring, as the tree's starting to move, the buds are starting to swell, the roots are really starting to give it big guns. If you get in there too early, remember, where's all the nutrients being stored for your tree over the winter? It's all in the roots, and it's all in the trunk. Now, if you get in there too early and start to prune roots off, you're pruning away a lot of that goodness. But if you leave it so that the buds are starting to swell and things are starting to grow, that goodness that was stored in the roots is already getting pushed up into the tree. And then that is, to me, and this is how I've always worked it over the years, that's the optimum time to get in. So the days are getting longer and they're getting warmer, so that the soil there is getting warmer, and you're more likely, I think, to be getting root growth developing. Whereas on the other side, as it comes into the winter, if you've cut roots, they're going to sit there cold and wet and frozen. They're not going to affix themselves over the winter time. That's just the way I've just found it for me over the years.
Harry Harrington says about doing it in autumn.
Yeah, he does, and he gets good results, and that's fine. That's how he does
says
it.
when he does them in spring, he don't get any growth or anything for
Well,
like 2 or 3 years or whatever.
I think he does do some in spring as well, but he does do a lot of his conifers in the autumn as well, and that's fine.
I think your window for getting it right is a lot smaller in winter than
Yeah,
in spring.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it works for
And
him.
you've got to look after them as well after, haven't you? So
And I mean, this is the thing. It's finding what works for you, right? It depends on what facilities that you have. If you're repotting, obviously you don't want, and if you've done any work to your trees, any massive wiring, bending, as I say, repotting, anything like that, don't just bung them out back in the freezing cold, or bung them straight back out into the blazing sun. Give them a bit of a break for a while until they've recouped themselves, and then put them back on the benches. If it's winter time and they've been, or you've done a repot on in the spring and frost's forecast, protect them. Put them in the greenhouse. Don't let the growing medium get frozen. I never ever let my growing medium at any point get frozen at all. There's this big fallacy, but the roots need to be frozen from time to time. Why? How can that possibly be of benefit to the trees? In a pot? Do you see what I mean? It's in a pot, it relies on us for everything. That's so... I mean, again, we were talking about the temperature and how they can be affected by the heat and the cold. Now, last year, we all know there's been a lot of tree deaths this last year. Everybody that you've just about talked to has had some tree deaths, right? Whether it be yews, Chinese elms, larch, whatever, I've known a few people who've had quite a lot of tree deaths. And there's been a lot of speculation on what's happened. Now, I'm only going to put my 2 pence in there. I haven't lost anything. I've been lucky. I haven't lost anything. And as I say, my garden is a sun trap. It got scorching in that really hot spell. 38, 40 degrees. Now, Mauro, and I might be pronouncing this, Mauro Comsta. Does anybody know who Mauro Comsta is? He is the guy who looks after Louis Vallejo's trees in Spain, that bonsai museum in Madrid, right? He did a test, and he'd said, right, tree in the landscape, 35 degrees. What are the roots like when they're in the ground? They did a test. It was about plus 20 degrees. So they were cooler. The lower it went, the cooler they become. A tree in a pot, 35 degrees. They did a check in the pot, plus 60 degrees. That's a lot. You know yourself when it gets really hot. You touch the side of the pot and it's red hot. The darker the pot, the worse it is. So, it was a bit of a fluke for me because when I work at Willowbog Bonsai and I do my teaching up there, I can't get home to check my trees the way I normally do. So what I have to do, I put wet towels over the tops of the pots just so I know it keeps the moisture in. And that was all it was to keep the moisture in, generally. But then I thought, right, when it's getting hot, you know, when this forecast was due, and I'm like, oh, right, what am I going to do? Because I didn't have all the space to shift them all to the shade. I moved the small ones into the shade, and I hosed the floor down and all the rest of it to keep the humidity up. And so what I did is I had a whole load of old towels that I had from the charity shop that I used to use to keep the moisture in when I was at Willowbog. So I absolutely soaked them and I put them right the way around both the top of the pot and round the sides of the pot. And the sun was beating on them, and if you went round and you put your hand underneath the towel and felt the pot, it was nice and cool.
It's the principle of a wine chiller.
It's
the principle of a wine chiller.
Yeah.
It evaporates the water from the towel and it drags heat from the pot.
But, and I do believe that's what saved a lot of my trees from that heat. And you won't notice it straight away. Pines and Junipers, as I say, can take ages to show signs of dying. Branches, the whole tree, whatever. So it was, and periodically, because I wasn't working, I couldn't work in gardens at that temperature. It was impossible. I don't know how people do it in other countries. Well, they don't have siesta time, don't they? They're not daft. And periodically I would go out and I would just hose the towels down to keep them wet. And to me, that's what saved me trees, because what happened was, and a friend of mine, he knocked later on in the season, he knocked a Chinese juniper out of the pot, and the front of the pot, the roots, they were black, they were all dead. Where they were fine round here, because the sun obviously had been belting down this side, and all the roots around there were all dead. And obviously the rot, because they're dead. People think rotten roots, root rot, you know, too much water. They're going to rot anyway, because they're dead. Once there's no living tissue in them, they're going to rot. But they were still alive right the way around here. So what I think's happened, rightly or wrongly, because the trees, the towels were keeping the root ball in the pot cool, when the trees went into the winter time, because let's face it, everyone was going on about the winter was like crap, and let's face it, for the north of England, it wasn't that bad. We got down to -5 and that was it, and that's fairly mild for us, you know. So yes, there was a period where one or two of the big pines that I have were a little bit frozen, and I don't generally like to get my trees frozen. Most of these go in my workshop all winter, and I never let any frost get in there. If it's going to be something like -10, there's a little heater goes on that keeps it just about 5 degrees, and that's all. So I personally think that the hot sun damaged the root ball. The trees went into winter with damaged root ball. So then it didn't take much, a week of frozen weather, and more roots got damaged. And then consequently some people did a root prune on them, they did a bit of repotting, and that was the final straw. And then things like some of the yews, you know, this disease that was floating about. Yes, I think there is a disease floating about, but I don't think it was the thing that killed the trees. I think that jumped on a weakened tree. But this is just my opinion.
I tend to agree, because if the roots are damaged in summer, come autumn time when it's building up the vascular tissue, and they're not there ain't going to be more energy in the vascular tissue.
Well, this is the thing, you see, a lot of people, and when people were describing what had happened, the tree, like, it started to come away in the spring. The buds were starting to come away, and some of the leaves opened up, and then it's like they said, it stalled it didn't get any further. And that's simply because the tree ran out of energy because the root damage that had happened in the summer and in the winter time. You know, there wasn't enough energy, there wasn't enough roots there to keep the tree growing, to take over from that stored energy in the tree. Does that all make sense? I mean, you don't have to agree with us. I mean, everybody's got their own kind of thoughts on all of this. But this is what I've found. And because I protected my trees through the heat, and I protect my trees in the winter time, and it seems to work for me. You know, this idea that, well, trees in nature, this doesn't happen. Trees in nature, it's not in nature. It's almost like it's domesticated. It's a tree in a pot. It relies on us for everything. That's just my thoughts. Any questions? He's going to go away, go, she's talked a load of shit.
When you were on about Akadama breaking down and what have you, loss of percolation, what do you just tackle that by dunking them, or do you stab the pots at all?
Yeah,
you know,
sometimes. I mean, I've known me to get a drill at them.
Yeah.
You know, with a drill, so at them to get it through, and they're quite happy. You know.
No, it's just what you're saying, having such a long repotting period, and then they say Akadama in this country breaks down.
One of the things in the horticultural past, I used to work in this massive garden, and there was a big woodland at part of this garden. And the lady that owned the garden, she had these huge compost bins. And this was in the woodland. Now, either side of the compost bins had what were called the leaf mould ditch. Right? So, because the bulk of the trees in this woodland were lime, right? When they all came down, there was quite a lot of horse chestnut as well, actually. When they all came down, we had to get them all off our lawn, and our lawn was like a bleeding field. So me and the guy that used to cut the grass were there with our blowers, blowing all the leaves into the leaf mould ditches. So what we used to do was, one year, we'd dig out the leaf mould on one side, put it on the garden. The other side was being rotted down, if you like. Now what happened was, what we discovered was, because we literally dug a trench rather than just piled it up, the roots of the trees broke it down shit loads faster than it would have done if it was just in a bag or in a compost heap.
Right.
A lot faster, and we're just talking a year. And leaves can take a long time to rot down if they're just left. You know, so it was the tree roots that were breaking down the leaves in these trenches. So we'd dig up that side, put it on the garden, put the new leaves in the trench on that side. Following year, we'd take the leaf mould out that side, and then put the leaves in that year. And so it went down the line, and this went on for years. And the amount of times it gave us a bad back was horrendous. But, so tree roots are meant to break things down, you know. And this is why this bit of a fallacy about Akadama, or it's crap, it's not very good, it keeps breaking down. Yeah, it's a little bit annoying because, yeah, you've got to water and it runs off, and it's a little bit more inconvenient for us. But I'm less bothered about that and what's better for the tree. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I know not everybody has the time or the inkling or the sad person as I am, where it just takes over my life. But any other questions? Does everybody feel a little bit kind of more better about pines?
Absolutely, thank you.
And yeah.
And junipers. And junipers.
And junipers, good.
Yeah.
Can I just
Thank
ask
you.
a question?
Yeah.
For a pot like that, would you put it in a bonsai pot, and how long would you leave it? Because you can't say it's matured in pot.
No, it'll not. That's the trouble with bonsai pots. And if you put it in a bonsai pot, it's going to restrict it even more because it's shallower, it's smaller. I would persevere. The only thing I would change with it is maybe if it's in compost or garden soil.
It'll be in garden soil because your mother wouldn't have paid for compost.
I would be tempted to take it out, remove some of the garden soil. Don't do it all at once because removing too much in one go, you might kill the tree.
The thing is with that though, those roots will have gone round and round.
Yeah,
and round.
well, in which case, just take a few off at a time, right?
When would you start?
Eh?
When would you start doing it?
I would do it in the spring.
Spring.
Yeah.
Because it's coming to your workshop, that's your bad news.
Hey, bring it on.
Oh, I am doing, that's what I wanted to know, what to do with it ready.
What would be the chances if you fed that up and really hammered it and got it firing on all four cylinders? What would the chances be of it backbudding on that trunk?
I mean, let's be realistic here. You're not going to get any backbudding along there.
No, but you put it down, can't you?
But you could get backbudding along some of these bits, and you might even get some along there, right? All this really needs, if you're looking kind of for a front on the tree, remember the bottom branch, if you're going on into aesthetics, I'll come back round there a little bit. Aesthetics of the tree, if you look at some of these front branches are coming round towards you. They're not doing this, or they're not doing that. They're coming gently round towards you. One's lower than the other one. See that one's lower? Asymmetry is always more pleasing to the eye than symmetry. So conifer branches, an old conifer branch drops down quite considerably. You can see with this, it drops down and then the foliage is tipped up to the light. It's important that all the buds go up to the light, right? That's what keeps them nice and healthy. Sometimes with pines, if you've got a piece of raw material, even if you're not doing a proper styling on it and the branches are all hanging down like that, pull a bit of wire on it and just tip them up to the light. Because the more light that there is on the buds, the healthier they'll be, right? So your apex needs to lean towards you, not massively, but we could do that. Don't look at them branches there and think I can't move them, because you can. They're quite easily moved then. I mean, big bit of wire, the good thing about them kind of pots is you can drill holes in and you can pull them down with a guy. But to get more control with them kind of branches, you need to put thick wire on and put a bit of movement in. Now your trunk's very straight, so if your trunk's straight, you're going to have less movement in the branches, right? And then the smaller stuff, take some of the older needles off, not too many because it's not that far advanced, and then start to form a foliage pad. So, as I say, I know that feels quite hefty. I'm not going to do it because it's often done better in stages. And all of this lot will get tipped up to the light to form a foliage pad there. Then pull this one down, another foliage pad there. And then you've got all of this lot to form an apex, and you've got that lot there to form a back branch. Back branches, very important. You need to add depth to your tree. It's not a two-dimensional image, it's a three-dimensional image.
So do you want me to start that before workshop?
I want you to finish it before the end of the night. No, honestly, we'll have a damn good play with it.
Right.
Alright, anybody else?
You want to put it in another pot?
If you're doing some styling on it, this is another thing. Don't wire style, pull branches around and repot at the same time. You're asking for bother.
So what I want about is, shall I shove it in a bonsai pot before I come? Because I don't repot it in a style it or not.
Leave it alone. Right. Leave it alone. If you're going to do some work on it, on the branches, taking it out of the pot is going to add insult to injury. Right.
It's been in there for 30 years, don't rush it.
Well,
I might just drill a few holes in bottom end because you can't tell any holes in bottom
that's it. It hasn't got any holes in. That's not going to help.
As I said, he's been abused. Not in my care.
It's going to be a big sigh of relief.
Filled up to the top of water occasionally, you know?
Yeah, get some holes put
When
in
you
the
get those holes in,
then
they'll be
it
the
drains.
biggest sigh of relief you've ever heard in your life.
I might feed it to know.
I'm impressed. 35 years, no holes in it. More than mud.
Well, it doesn't look too bad, though, does
That's
it?
what I'm saying, he's been abused.
Pots, the bonsai pots and bonsai.
And all this thing out for biogold and stuff.
Yeah, no, just work the top, don't work the bottom in the same year.
Right.
I say, I think hundreds and hundreds of years ago, Japanese bonsais were in pots like that, weren't they, before?
Oh,
You know,
probably.
before they went really
Yeah,
shallow.
yeah. Well, it's like everything, it's a bit of a fashion thing.
Yeah.
I mean, junipers, sometimes when they're in shows, they leave the old flaky bark on them. And sometimes it's fashionable to strip the old flaky bark off and put camellia oil on the trunk to
Make
get
it
that
red.
nice contrast between red
Yeah.
and the dead wood. And it's just a fashion thing. You know, what's in fashion at the time.
Yeah.
So,
Do you know what pine that is?
tell
Okay. Do you know what pine that is?
No, we just call it his mother's.
Mother's
I
pride.
think that's the same as that I've got.
Probably.
No idea.
That red, well, I'm not sure because the bark's different.
No idea.
But the needles on it, it's quite light and airy, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Same as mine.
Well,
And they're both air layered.
They seem very soft needles, don't they?
They're both air layered.
As opposed to black bark.
To be right, you'll be soft if you've been in there for some time, won't you? To be right, you'll trade each other.
It's got 3 needles.
Yeah, mine has an all.
I know it all said.
Mine's a radiata.
Right. So that's quite unusual. It's got 3 needles. There's not that many pines have 3 needles.
Mine's fine.
Over again.
So,
Right, sorry, have you finished, love? Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Right, I hope you've all enjoyed it.